How did the lives of 3 women suddenly change with one phone call? This is Dispatches from the Culture War. I'm MD Perkins. One of the core aspects of the culture war battle that Christians have been waging since the 1970s has been the issue of pornography, its proliferation across society. If you go back and watch the movie Culture Warrior that I directed that deals with Don Wildman and the battle for decency, you'll see that this issue has been a concern for Christians for quite a long time. And the impact of pornography on society is massive, and we're seeing that now. Of course, if you go back and you're thinking about historically how Christians have battled pornography with magazines and convenience stores and things like that, the ways that the proliferation of pornography through the internet, now through smartphones, the use of AI, and all of these sorts of things have really impacted and are changing the landscape of pornography overall. I recently watched a news report by CNBC that discussed these 3 women who were all friends. They were college buddies going back. They were part of a friend group, and there was a man who was part of their friend group as well. And one day, each of these women receives a phone call from that man's wife, saying that, turns out that she was in the midst of a divorce from this man. But what she said was that on his computer and on his devices were sexually explicit imagery of each of these women. Now, of course, none of these women had produced these images. None of them had taken these images themselves. These were things that he had generated himself using AI nudification applications, these nudification software programs that it's an AI generative platform where you can take a face and you can put it into a system, have it analyze that data and produce an AI-generated body or put that face onto someone else's body. And even though the man had not distributed these images online, at least as far as these women could tell, he said that he hadn't. But nevertheless, obviously, there was a deep break of trust. There was a sense of violation. Each of these women were deeply concerned, bothered, in some ways traumatized by the fact that this exploitative imagery of them existed at all. Not just that it wasn't being distributed, but that this man that they had been friends with had actually done this to them and many other women. It was found that there were at least 80 real-life women who had been reconfigured using this AI generative software. So this news story has just kind of lived in my head for the last week because it's such a troubling reality. I mean, AI is obviously going to be increasingly a major part of our lives, but the ramifications of what AI is doing and has done are things that I think Christians need to be aware of. And one of the ways that we need to be aware of it is with its application specifically within the world of pornographic imagery. There are problems inherently if the man were to have distributed these photos. There are laws on the books now. There's one that just passed. It's called the Take It Down Act that Senator Ted Cruz had introduced in 2024, and it just was passed and signed into law by President Trump in May of 2025. And this prohibits the non-consensual publication of both authentic and AI-generated imagery of individuals. So essentially, if there's some awareness that there is an image of you out there, sexually explicit, and whether you actually made that image yourself or whether this was generated through AI, that you have the right to respond to whoever's distributing that and tell them that they do not have permission to distribute that image, and that they are required by law to take that down instantly. So that deals with one aspect of the front. And of course, there's a whole section dealing with minors in that as well, because that's the other frightening application when you think about the use of AI imagery, the way that they might be used to both represent children and continue to harm children, either by taking real children's faces and creating sexually explicit imagery for representing those children, or people who are just, essentially getting off on AI-generated children-based imagery. Now, some people may think of that as actually something that's good about AI imagery, because children themselves are not physically being harmed or exploited by having them be forced into some sort of sex trafficking situation, or forced to pose in sexually explicit ways or perform sexual acts, or all of these sorts of things, because it can all just be fake. It can all just be AI. But of course, as Christians, and hopefully anyone, even if you're not a Christian, should be able to recognize the long-term ramifications of normalizing and justifying sexual exploitation of children, even if the pornographic imagery themselves doesn't feature real children. So that's something that we need to be aware of. Now, one of the things with this video is I started looking through the comments. And of course, a lot of what you saw, there were plenty of people offering sympathy and support for these women who were violated. But at the same time, you saw a lot of comments in some ways dismissing it or somewhat justifying it, or acting like this really wasn't that big of a concern because Photoshop has existed. The one comment from Gabe Geronimo said, "To be fair, this could already be done before AI, just not en masse and instantly. It was called Photoshop." Backhand Snipe 9943 says the technology is nuts, but by this own videos reporting the images were on this man's private computer. The wife found them and then redistributed the images herself. Let's remove the skill barrier question for a moment and say that this man was just really talented in Photoshop and he had the same images on his personal devices. So Ming1091 says, I see no issue with this, as people that have talent have been using Photoshop to edit or enhance images or hack or just draw them naked. Well, it's the internet and there's no way to stop this. Remember, freedom is in the mind of humans that could not be taken away, and that's very important. Tim Sells 2035 says, then we should just ban Photoshop too, just so some Karen would not appear naked on someone's private computer. So you can see what's happening here, the justification that people are already offering in their mind of, well, Photoshop has already existed for a long time. Of course, prior to Photoshop, you could draw something, you could take an X-Acto knife to an actual physically printed photograph, and with cutting and actual pasting, you could recreate these sorts of things. But the issue isn't just that Photoshop has existed. There was always the capability to do this. People just weren't skilled enough. It's easier now. It's faster now, and all of those sorts of things. Although that in itself should be concerning, because there was a skill barrier. And so someone had to essentially commit themselves to perpetrate something like this. And Photoshop made it easier than the cutting and pasting of actual photos, but it still required some time. It still required some skill to make it look like it was cohesive. And I don't know what kind of monetary gain there might have been for someone to do that. But these Nudify applications are actually making money on this as well. And so that's a troubling component. Many of them seem to be owned by companies that are not American, so they're offshore accounts, probably hoping to skirt certain American laws that may be on the books or may be developing here in the next few years as AI becomes more of a concern and legislation and policy might ramp up regarding how to regulate certain aspects of AI. So there was a study that was put together in 2024 called Analyzing the AI Nudification Application Ecosystem. And what this study, which contained people from a lot of different universities, is that it was trying to understand how the application process actually functioned, what it said, what it seemed to imply, the way that users would interact with it, and things like this. And so this is talking about synthetic, non-consensual AI-created imagery. That's kind of their technical term for it. And the more popular way to talk about it is nudification software. But, some of these companies are even switching the way that they market this and just calling it face swapping so that maybe they can get around some of the barriers that might be there on Google or Apple as these platforms that are offering apps. But I mean, it's website based as well, so you could even go beyond just apps. But they talk about that there's a social issue of sexual harassment and abuse that this is inherently working within. So it's not merely a matter of this man did something privately and he should be able to have that privacy to do this as long as he doesn't distribute it. What's the problem? Well, the problem is the over-sexualization of society and the normalization of pornography, and even in this case, essentially the entitlement that every person, or let's be real, this is not equally men and women dealing with this. This is men typically seeking out nude pictures of women. There should not be some entitlement that every woman should be able to be visibly represented in nude or sexually explicit ways. And that's essentially what these kinds of applications offer. They completely open the door for everyone to essentially have potential blackmail material. And this has, of course, happened within youth culture, high schools, cyberbullying, the use of AI-generated software to essentially blackmail or accost someone by spreading out these distributing these images across devices and sharing them and humiliating somebody, and even in some cases driving someone to suicide because they're so embarrassed, violated, humiliated, and traumatized by the whole thing. So there's a lot of issues tied up with this that we need to recognize. But something else that you need to recognize is a way that these applications actually make it easier for child exploitation, because only this analyzing the AI nudification application ecosystem, this study it took a representative sample of 20 different platforms that were doing this and studied the ways in which each of these operated, the language that was used, what was promised, the kinds of ways that it was monetized, how easy it was to access sexually explicit imagery at all, how easy it was to get to the generative AI parts of it. And it found that 14 of the 20 sites ask for users to confirm their age. Now, that's more than half, but that's still 6 out of 20 did not ask for age verification. And if you're aware of the age verification laws that are sought to be passed in a number of different states, then you know that's a piece of low-hanging fruit that Christians can get behind and recognize, no, that doesn't solve the entire issue of pornography, but that is something that we could target and go after and make it harder for children to just get access to online pornography. And we're seeing that once those laws are on the books, some of these large pornography distributors like Pornhub don't actually want to operate in the states where these things are becoming harder and more cumbersome for them. And in addition to that, 5 out of the 20 sites actually showed nude content prior to confirmation of age. So even if there is some sort of age verification in some of these sites, there's still access to sexually explicit imagery even before you get to the actual request for age verification, it found in some cases. Now, these sites are making money, and in what ways would they make money? How can they monetize? What can they offer? Well, they can offer speed, faster times to generate these imagery, or queue priority. I guess people are in a line, and I guess essentially it's connected with speed, but queue priority might operate somewhat differently. The quality of the imagery, how large it is, how detailed, I guess. The file size, you could get larger file sizes. I guess videos in some cases. Watermark removal. Some of these sites put a watermark over top of it. And the ability to save your history is sometimes offered a benefit. Interestingly, also the ability to delete your history is sometimes offered as a benefit, according to these researchers who dug into the details on these nudification sites. We need to step back and take a bigger look at this, because the issue is bigger than just some particular women who were violated in this particular case. This has massive implications on the future of society and the kind of normalization of imagery, the kinds of sexually exploitive material that people will be seeking out in common course. An expectation that you can just, if you see someone you think is beautiful and you happen to have an image of them. I mean, these ladies, the pictures that were taken of them were just these benign photos that were on their Facebook pages, on their social media sites, on Instagram. Just celebrating a child's graduation from kindergarten, vacation photos, just posing with the spouse. These are just very benign pictures that don't have any sexual content to them anyway. But all it takes is the AI generative software to read the face, to be able to take that out and either paste it or generate a new body that looks like this person. And so I also wonder, are these things being saved by the AI platforms that are making them? Is that person's face now a generative model that could show up somewhere else down the line, regardless of whether that person consented to their image being used at all? Now, if you're familiar at all with this problem of pornography and you're involved in the fight, then you've probably run across a group called NCOSE. That's the acronym NCOSE, which is the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. And there was an interesting article that I saw there that wasn't directly related to AI imagery, but it was just on pornography addiction. And it was titled "Pornography Addiction Seeking Novelty Until Desensitized." And so this article was really about the shift that happens as someone becomes addicted to pornography. Some of those tastes operate very benign, just looking at softcore imagery, just nude bodies, but then the desire for hardcore imagery, so actually seeing people involved in sexual acts, and then more and more explicit, more and more aggressive, sometimes getting into violent sexual content, and sometimes illegal sexual content in terms of imagery with animals, imagery with children, imagery that depicts incest. And these things are commonplace within the world of pornography. And the reason for this, scientists actually have a name for it, the article points out. It is the term natural reinforcers. And one of the observations of the article is that there are two powerful natural rewards that the internet provides in unlimited supply, and those are sex and novelty. And as the article began to consider the impact of this, it referenced a 2015 study from Belgium that was looking at the usage patterns of those who engage and would be considered addicted to pornography. And it talked about problematic use, which was just, those who were addicted. So how did it define a problematic use? What were some of the implications in individuals? Well, it found that they had a loss of control, that they couldn't control how much they were consuming, that there was a persistent desire, that there was unsuccessful attempts to stop or to slow down or to somehow curb these desires or pushes to indulge, using sexual behavior as a coping mechanism, a sense of withdrawal if those desires were not able to be satisfied immediately. And then lastly, there was a need for more time with pornography and for more extreme content. So when you think about this, what AI generative pornography actually offers is what the Nikosi article mentioned, sex and novelty, because you have an endless spectrum of possibilities available, including those that make you feel part. It makes the pornography feel part of your everyday life, because now you can incorporate actual people in your life and essentially nudify them so that they can become sexual objects in your own personal, exploitative, wrongful, activities. And, when you think about that should bother us. It's not just that these things were being distributed or that they are distributed. The reality is, when these things are generated online, you don't actually know if they're being distributed or not. I mean, this man may not have distributed physically, or digitally. I don't know how you even describe it. He didn't distribute these images himself, but could those images exist online somewhere and show up somewhere? Could those images be, held by the purveyor, the software application, and then sold or offered to other websites on the internet? I don't see what would prohibit them from doing that. So when you think about it isn't, of course, Christians have always dealt with this claim that pornography was victimless, that there weren't any victims of pornography, but that's simply not true. And you have cases like this where, by all accounts, it should be victimless because they didn't pose for these things. This isn't exposing their actual bodies, but nevertheless, there was the violation of presenting them as sex objects for sexual exploitation. Image-based sexual exploitation is a real thing. And the fact that they didn't consent to it obviously is problematic, but the fact that the man just had the very simple ability to create this on his own should be troubling. One of the other comments on the CNBC video said, "Remember, even if this issue is solved, it's hardly even remotely the worst thing about AI, which is that it will destroy the minds of most people." Now, I can appreciate that to a level, but as my comment said, this actually is part of destroying people's minds. Pornography is part of destroying people's minds. And so the issue with AI isn't just that it will stop us from thinking clearly or fully or making the right kinds of connections, kind of like, GPS kind of hinders our ability to understand geography better the more that we rely on it. And ChatGPT and some of these language models will probably operate the same way when it comes to knowledge. So yes, AI does have the capability of destroying our mind, but pornography is already in the process of destroying your mind. And so that's something that we need to be aware of, and we need to find ways to stop and curb and mitigate the damage that this is having to real people. Because as the Nicosi article said at the end, the never-ending quest for novelty among pornography consumers creates demand for more and more pornography. So this doesn't just stop. And AI offers the opportunity for greater and greater sex and novelty. And that's something that we should be concerned about.